The Railroad. This entire faction proves that Bethesda's ideology of keep it simple, stupid can often go way too far. I did not know at first how Bethesda managed this, but they made a faction that should have been about slow burn subterfuge and tense spycraft in the post apocalypse boring. And that eventually did lead me to realizing the real problem with this faction. But first, the characters. This faction being boring is especially strange when you consider the characters that make up the Railroad could fairly easily lend themselves to moderately interesting, or at least fairly entertaining storytelling. The key word there being could. So let's go over the characters first, if only to emphasize that point. Deacon. This man, if that is what he is a master of disguise and a compulsive liar, constantly making up the most ridiculous stories he can, while being surrounded by people who would likely have to make up or at least memorize their own fictitious backstories for missions, and yet his still come off as absurd by a wide margin, even in the world of Fallout. He also might have known about the Lone Wanderer the moment he or she stepped out of 111, or even before. Oh, and he is also suspected by Desdemona to be a guy named John D. Yep, even the Railroad's actual leader does not know who and what he really is. Pam. Pam is a military assaultron robot reprogrammed to act as a predictive algorithm, making her, in a sense, the Mama Murphy of the Railroad. She is also one of the few base game robots who acts with a robotic personality. Drummer Boy is wasted potential. A guy who wants to do more for the cause, or at the very least have a more exciting job, while seemingly not actually realizing how incredibly important his real job actually is. Desdemona. As far as I know, she has no pre-faction backstory, unlike the other faction leaders in the Commonwealth. She does have a backstory after joining the Railroad, but not only do you need to get into terminals to learn what little there is, we never actually learn why she joined the Railroad in the first place, at least as far as I could find. Glory is a rescued synth who hates the Institute and begged to join the Railroad after doing some quote-unquote crazy stunt with High-Rise, and that is all we really learn about her. Dr. Carrington has a massive chip on his shoulder, but we don't really know why. All we know for sure is he survived the switchboard incident, which is definitely true of several other current members as well. And he might rightly view Desdemona as a very poor leader. Tinker Tom. Okay, somebody take those explosives away from him, please. That's a little better. Thomas Weatherby is a complete lunatic, having slowly gone mad after the Institute killed his family. Whether this was even intentional or accidental, we have no idea, and it probably wouldn't really matter to him anyways. We don't even know where he learned the stuff he knows, which is kind of a problem with a lot of the technologically inclined people in Fallout. They just seem to magically be good with machines from an early age. Okay, that's really the only important characters here, at least all the ones still kicking. So, before I try to perform necromancy on this dead fish of a faction, I want to finally go over the real problem here. And that problem can be summed up with this statement. Actual spycraft is by necessity very monotonous and boring. It only gets exciting when something has gone horribly wrong, or someone has royally screwed up. And weirdly, things have gone consistently wrong with the Railroad until the sole survivor shows up to help out, making the Railroad seem completely incompetent at best, or incredibly unlucky. You could argue the Institute being hyper-competent, but that seems rather unlikely given everything we know about them. This actually brings up a weird similarity the Railroad and the Minutemen share. All of the most interesting or faction-shaping events happen to both long before you even leave Vault 111. But at least with the Minutemen, your presence and action change them for the better by bringing them back from near extinction. In the Railroad, you are an errand boy. You did not help shape the faction into something new or even change individual named members' fates, with the one small possible exception being Glory, which I personally believe was an accidental oversight by Bethesda. They frankly seem to really want her to be not alive anymore. Their only story paths she seems to survive is the Minutemen only run and the very rare and annoyingly difficult to attain peaceful ending. And I'm not even sure about those ones. Go too far with the Railroad? Unalived. Go too far down the Brotherhood path? Unalived. Too far down the Institute path? Unalived. Go full Nurbit? Unalived. That last one is, however, the player's fault. Where was I? Oh yeah, changing fates. Each faction has you make choices that alter their fates to an extent, at least in theory. The Minutemen. You literally bring them back from the brink and give the entire Commonwealth a second chance at some sort of future stability. The Institute of Incorrigible Incompetence. You become their actual leader, although that is so terribly implemented it might as well not be there. And the Brotherhood. Help resurrect Liberty Prime and give them the likely greatest military asset left in Fallout's world. Oh, also erase the Institute and Railroad from the map. And then the Railroad. Well, you help free a few synths, and then take down the Brotherhood, and then the Institute from within, kind of. However, you are only reacting to the Brotherhood's actions, and frankly, Desdemona's decision to act against the Institute how and when she does makes no sense, and you have absolutely zero say in the matter. I am fairly certain you can't even change her mind on any single particular set of actions. I'd hazard to say you're being railroaded. I'd say now is a good time to give a basic rundown on how the Railroad storyline goes. Oh wait, I just did. Help free a few synths, destroy the Pridwin, then go undercover, and the rest of the Railroad questline is just the Institute questline with a different outcome. Yeah, the Railroad questline doesn't really even have its own endgame questline. So, we know the biggest flaws now. 1. The main character has no real effect on the storyline other than choosing the Railroad. 2. Everything really interesting happens pre-Soul Survivor. Seriously, to learn about the faction proper, you have to go terminal entry hunting. That should really be reserved for learning interesting nuances, not basic character info. 3. The Railroad essentially hijacks another faction's questline. That last one at least makes a kind of twisted, lazy writing sense. 4. And this one I didn't bring up yet, but the Railroad takes over the Commonwealth checkpoints after a Railroad victory, which makes no sense. More on that later. How could we fix this? Well, hold on, let me find some duct tape. Okay. Let's start at the beginning, aka the recruitment. The Freedom Trail and subsequent password. Under no circumstances should the Railroad have left an actual trail for people to follow. Right to their front door, by the way. I thought I'd clarify that for anyone unfamiliar with these supposedly intelligent, experienced folk. There's a good reason that in Oblivion, the Dark Brotherhood seek you out, not the other way around. And frankly, despite the obvious moral differences, it should work the same for the Railroad. They cannot afford to be found. They've already learned that lesson the hard way. I'll go over why the other factions don't have that same writing issue at the end of the video. They should have Deacon seek you out and test you to determine if you are actually Railroad material or not, preferably by offering you a job that doesn't seem connected to the synths in any way until the end, where you would encounter several captured synths and have to decide whether to help them or not. If you decide to help them, at your own detriment or risk, then and only then would Deacon invite you to join the Railroad. Honestly, it would be a good way to incorporate Covenant into the Railroad questline. And, frankly, Covenant very much should involve the Railroad. Heck, having Honest Dan be a member of the Railroad would make perfect sense in this scenario, especially considering he does not give a damn whether Stockton's so-called daughter is synth or human. This would be a good test of the player's sympathies. If they save her, regardless of her synth status, and simply say they don't care how she was born, then Dad would introduce you to Deacon proper, and have Deacon then lead you to the Railroad headquarters, preferably in the most ridiculously roundabout, Deaconish way imaginable. I just think having Deacon drag you around in several different directions to confuse any tells would be appropriately paranoid and funny. Because the Railroad should have multiple security measures, and Deacon should be a rather paranoid SOB at this point, maybe have him lead you on a merry jaunt that passes close by a few captured or endangered synths. If anyone would have an idea of such areas at any one time, it would be him. This would be to see if your choice to help the synth or synths at the Covenant dungeon was a fluke or genuine. Once you get to the headquarters while having Deacon with you, you should witness Desdemona and Deacon exchange some simple code phrases to tell her you're trustworthy. Only after that, and some further questioning by the Railroad heads, should you be welcomed as a tourist of the Railroad. The first few missions you are sent on should essentially be further tests. Just because Deacon trusts you doesn't mean everyone else should. Make them look appropriately cautious by giving the new guy a handful of less important but still risky tasks to prove their loyalty. After a few quests to rescue captured synths or gather useful equipment, and you have shown yourself to be reliable, then you should be given a more important task, like, say, meeting and assisting High Rise. And High Rise himself should have at least enough quests and dialogue for you to become slightly invested in said character. Having him be axed off after pretty much no real interaction with the main character means the player doesn't really care that it happened. I understand that by their very nature, modern Bethesda games don't push you to care about the characters, but that is part of the problem. Okay, so once you've finished High Rise's quests and gotten to know the inhabitants of that safe house, he should send you back to Desdemona, who immediately sends you back to High Rise's place in a semi-panic as it's being attacked at that very moment. This may seem like an unlikely timing for the attack, and it is. More on that a little down the line. But it would put the suspicion on you making for a tense situation once you return to the railroad. And Desdemona didn't actually send you back to High Rise to save him. She knew there wasn't time to actually do so. She did so in a desperate attempt to gain time to properly prepare the church for a suspected incoming attack, having suspected you sold out High Rise and firmly believing that the headquarters was next. When you return, you should be met with a small army of very armed, very twitchy railroad heavies and Desdemona waiting for you. What happens next would depend on either your charisma or how well you've gotten to know the unique railroad characters at this point. If you've done something dangerous or personal for any of them, each of said characters should vouch for you. This would reward players who actually got to know them. If not, well, I hope your talking game is on point. If you can't convince them of your trustworthiness through either previous actions and character affinities or your charming personality, and frankly, talking them out of a fight should be far more difficult if you have joined the Brotherhood, they should then demand you disarm immediately. If you disagree, they will then attack you and you'll have to fight the entire railroad then and there. Being able to fail a quest and keep going in the world would make it feel more alive. Modern Bethesda seems to be terrified of letting its players fail. Old Bethesda was not. You do have the option of outright wiping out the railroad yourself at any time, but that's not the same as coming into conflict with them through story means. That's just your character being a psychopath. So, if you surrender to them, they would then lock you in a holding cell for a time, only for a massive ruckus to be kicked off outside the church. It's the Brotherhood of Steel. They are here for obvious reasons. This is when Deacon would ask for your help and release you from the cell, giving back your equipment. You would then cement your actual loyalties depending on who you actually help in the battle. If you help the Brotherhood, the railroad is wiped out and you're offered the potential chance to join them by the ranking knight or paladin on scene, assuming Dance hasn't already done so already, or at the very least you didn't take him up on the offer. If you help the railroad, the Brotherhood attackers are wiped out and Desdemona accepts that you're on the railroad's side. It would turn out that a Brotherhood scout had been telling the escort of the synth you had guided to High Rise. That's how they knew where it was, and how they knew where the headquarters was. It wasn't a coincidence, it was another railroad agent not being careful enough. Don't worry about that individual's incompetence going forward, they didn't make it. At least so Desdemona tells me. I do wonder who actually ended that individual's dangerous levels of stupidity. I suppose we'll never know. Now, dealing with the Brotherhood. It is extremely likely that they would try again and again. The railroad knows this, and the railroad does not have their resources, nor can it afford to lose any more people to the bigots of steel. So we have to bring them down. A straight-up attack is out of the question considering their full military might, and a technological attack of some sort from a distance would also not work. Many of their better scribes are likely every bit as capable as Tinkers with TNT Tom. So, stealth it is. As much as I find the canon quest to do this goofy as all get out, sneaking in and disabling their ship from within is probably the only real option here. Just maybe have anyone other than Tinker Tom fly the bird. I know the Brotherhood pilots are so terrible they break the very fabric of reality, so he would fit right in, but we need to get there in one piece. Unless you've already completed that Commie Submariner's quest line and have nukes in your back pocket. If so, you really should be given the option to use them at this point on the Pridwin and airport. Regardless of how you deal with the railroad, the next step is not to confront the Institute, at least not yet. Assuming you've joined them, you should be sent to the Minutemen and check to make sure they don't intend to interfere in railroad business going forward. This step would be simple, as you're the general, so it would just be you asking Preston not to interfere. Now it's finally time to go after the Institute. But not by joining them and pretending everything's hunky-dory. That could go wrong in so many ways. This will either be a disposal job or an actual infiltration. If you have already entered the Institute and met Sean, you will be sent to discreetly remove the head of the Institute, causing chaos within their ranks, allowing an attack force to quickly slip in and lay waste to their forces, then free the synths. If you have not met Sean, your job on being sent into the Institute will be to find a master shutdown code for all coursers. If the Institute weren't run by a half-baked supervillain, they would definitely have one in case of some kind of mass malfunction, especially considering how dangerous coursers are supposed to be. You would also need to find a key code to allow others to teleport into the Institute, or a shutdown code for the waterway entrance's security systems. Once you have the shutdown code and a way in safely, you can then lead the railroad en masse into the heart of the Institute and seize control of said facility. Yes, seize, not destroy. Why would the railroad destroy the synth's only known means of reproduction? I don't believe even the latest gen synths can do so the old-fashioned way. I could be wrong there. I don't think it's made all that clear in the game, unless I'm forgetting something important. There's also the fact that I'm pretty sure this railroad is an offshoot of another railroad whose whole thing is freeing slaves in general. Teleportation tech would probably help with that a great deal going forward. So in the end, the railroad has freed the synths and taken control of a shiny new, very high-tech headquarters from which to fight any injustices they wish, even if said injustices may or may not be malfunctioning machines freaking out. Oh, and the whole Desdemona telling you can't hang around anymore because of security reasons needs to be dropped. Having someone as capable as the sole survivor around at need would not be something most leaders would scoff at. Well, they might in real life, but this isn't real life. This is a post-apocalypse. Okay, there you have it. I believe these changes, mostly minor, some major, could make for at least a more engaging railroad faction. The only other way I can see is if we actually embrace the slow burn subterfuge, requiring patience, careful information gathering, and rare extractions, building up to gaining the actual info you need to overcome the Institute's technological advantage. Sadly, not only is Fallout 4 not that kind of game, it would likely appeal to a fairly small part of the game's casual audience. I'm sure many actual RPG fans would absolutely love it, but Bethesda doesn't make games for RPG fans anymore. Last, but not least, the Railroad should not have units guarding checkpoints in the Commonwealth if they are the sole victors, so to speak. They don't have the manpower or even motive to do so, and it's too public-facing for their sensibilities. It makes no sense. Okay, I said I'd go over this at the end, so why don't the other factions need to hide, at least from a world-building or writing perspective? Well, simply put, the Brotherhood have overwhelming military power and a great deal of pride. They're not hiding without a good reason. The Institute have an overwhelming technological advantage, a disposable army, and are also already hidden. The Minutemen actually need to be public-facing to accomplish their goals. If they're going to protect people and build trust, they can't be hiding. The Gunners are supposed to be skilled and pricey mercenaries. Hiding would make them look weak or scared to potential clients, costing them money. Raiders. Chems. 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 And more chems. Okay, actually, raiders need to be feared, otherwise groups would likely emerge to eliminate them. They also tend to range mentally anywhere from slightly mad to the Joker if he snorted an entire white brick of the highest quality. Super mutants. Yeah, super mutants don't hide or run. They truly believe that they are unstoppable. That's why many of them will rush you with a plank of wood, even if you're in power armor and have a minigun. Well, That's all for today, so thank you for listening to my inane ramblings.